Time for our morning Bible study to begin. Before we get started this morning, Brother Jack, would you wear us an opening prayer, please?
Father in heaven, we thank you, Lord, for today, the lessons today. We thank you for this opportunity to come out and study another portion of your word. We pray you be with us here today and everything's pleasing in your sight. Thank you for Brother Bobby. Give him a ready recollection of all the things that you prepared to say. All these special blessings we ask in Christ's name.
Amen. First thing I need to do, I just thought about, I need to turn this off. And it's good to be here this morning. It's good to see everyone out. We do appreciate the presence of everyone. We know there's a few running behind, and we have those that are not with us this morning. We know Brother Jeremy, I think he's at training this morning. Haven't heard from the Schultzes, so I don't really know about them. Jeff and Joyce have been on them a little bit. But anyway, it's good to be here. We do appreciate the presence of everyone, as we said. And I think today we're going to begin at chapter 46. We're moving right along in the book of Genesis, and maybe we'll get through 46 and move on into 47. And we'll just see how it goes. And, we find that Genesis chapter 45, we find that Jacob now has been told that Joseph is alive and in Egypt. So we find that Jacob, no doubt was startled by this thought, but one of the things you begin to see that in verse 28, at Israel, we notice that refers to Jacob now. It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go down and see him before I die. And so we find a big change in the heart and mind and attitude and disposition of Jacob. He's not as cynical and as negative as he used to be. And that's what this term, it is enough. You can see that direction in Jacob's life now has changed him. And I think we talked about that pretty extensively last week. Setting a time frame for this, we're probably somewhere in the 1706 BC time frame, so that puts us somewhere around 648 years after the flood. So one of the things that we learned as we look at this is today, and so it was in the beginning. Time and the plan of God still keeps marching on, doesn't it? And so we find is in this case here, we're going to be talking about Jacob going into Egypt, and how God is going to bless them to become a great nation. And so we find in verse 1, and it says that Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto the God his father Isaac. And so we find that this place, Beersheba, is full of historical significance in the Bible. It's down south of what would become the land of Israel, which is currently called Canaan at this time, just before they were to go over into what would be the outermost bands of Egypt at that time. And it is a place of historical significance because, like it says here, his father Isaac did offer sacrifices here at this place. And yet we find that both Abraham and Isaac lived there for a period of time. And if you want to turn back and look at that, and we're not this morning, Genesis 22:19 as far as Abraham is concerned, and Genesis chapter 26 and verse 23 for Isaac. So we find it is a place of significant importance. We also find that Abraham, he planted that special tree there in Beersheba many years, and we talked about that before, and had called on the name of the Lord there. We know that Isaac received a special promise from God, and he built an altar for sacrifice there in that Genesis chapter 26, verses 24 through 25. And so, probably in Jacob's mind or Israel's mind, as he is starting to be called, this was a very special place because he's remembering what God had done. He mentions his forefather here, Isaac, and of course you look back at what Abraham did there. So it was a special place of remembrance for them. And so we find that And at verse 2, and God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, here am I. So we find Jacob responding to this vision that God is sending him. And notice it says visions of the night. So may have been more than one vision, but what this vision is going to be about is a reconfirmation about him going down to Egypt and the promise that he would not stay there but come out of Egypt. And so we find a very important vision here. And we talked about it's not unusual for God to have spoken to the fathers in times past by these visions. We know that Hebrews chapter 1 verse 1 and 2 tells us about that, how God spoke to these people in times past. So these visions were not unusual. You know, if you think about it, one of the noted visions that Jacob had seen was 40 years earlier, wasn't it? And that was what the vision we call Jacob's ladder in Genesis chapter 28, verses 12 through 17. So we find Jacob had seen visions before. Now this vision is about him. Don't you fear about going down into Egypt? You know, there was fear about leaving that promised land and going into Egypt. But maybe some of it had to do with the past history of his family. We know Abraham had went down to Egypt, and basically because he had lied to Pharaoh, and in the vision Pharaoh realized that Abraham had lied to him. He basically ran Abraham out of Egypt, didn't he? And so we know that Isaac, he was told not to go down there into Egypt. So, you know, Egypt was a place with them that was kind of taboo in a sense, traditionally in the family history. And yet we're going to find that God is going to use this place to prosper Israel, right?
You also have when Abraham and Lot separated.
That's it.
Abraham was told by God that this area is for you and your descendants for generations. That's kind of the verbal history you pass on to your children.
Yeah.
That would be one of the reasons why Jacob was hesitant to leave that area.
Sure. I mean, and so there was a lot of events transpiring, and that one in particular, okay, about this was the promised land in the sense I would say it today, and not to leave. So there was some apprehension on his part about going down into Egypt. And so God tells him, and I notice this here am I, that's just really interesting, isn't it? You'll find that repeated at several occasions in the Bible about here am I. And, you know, we find that when here am I, send me. And even Jesus, you know, and I think we talked about that last week about Jesus, you know, I am he, when they came to arrest him there. So we find that's very significant. Here am I. And he said, I am God, talking about God, the God of thy father, fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will make thee a great nation. And you know, the core group of this is going to be somewhere, if you count Joseph's descendants, which would be Jacob's grandchildren. I think the Septuagint says 75. Our rendering in the KJV says 70 because they're including the descendants of Joseph there in Egypt. So out of that core group is going to become a nation of up to several million. God is going to really prosper them there in that land. And it's not just any land he's going to give them, is it? It's the best. And Pharaoh said it was the best. He said, you give them the best. And not only that, Pharaoh tells Joseph, now those that are a competent herdsmen, they can oversee my flock. So there was great favor here amongst these people. And it all had to do with Joseph and the way he behaved himself as an intercessory on behalf of his brothers and his father and that family. And God said, fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will make thee a great nation. So don't you be afraid. I'm going to bless you. You go down and do, and you establish yourself in this land. And he said, I will go down with thee into Egypt. Interesting thought there. Don't you be afraid. You go down there. He said, I'm going to be with you. You know, that was a very strange place for them to go, the Egyptian land. And yet they went, and who was with them? God was with them. You know, a lot of times we have people that go into strange lands and take the gospel with them, and this is a shadow or sense of that. Don't be afraid to go. I'll be with you. Brother Conner, I wish I could remember the brother's name, but years ago, I used to get a lot of papers from the Brotherhood. And there was an article in there about one of the members of the church. If I could call his name, most of us would probably recognize it, okay? But he did a lot of work over there in the Southeast Asia area, over around Laos and Cambodia and Thailand and places like that. And it said of him that when he was over there, I can't remember if it was in Laos or Cambodia, that the government got to looking for him, the soldiers got to looking for him, because he was bringing in the gospel of glad tidings. And it was said of him that he had so much confidence and trust in God that when he would lay down to sleep at night, he slept like a baby. And the one incident where the soldiers was right outside the hut looking for him. And you know, those huts over there a lot of times are just grass and leaf type huts. So you had him in here asleep, and here you have the enemy, if you will, those soldiers out there looking for him. So that's having a lot of trust in God, isn't it? To be able to do that in a strange place like that. So when we read that, we thought about that. I wish I could remember his name. It's probably in the archive up in the attic. And I need to dig that stuff out and file it with the rest of the stuff that I've been working on. That's been kind of a project within itself. Anyway, so we find that I will surely be, and that's what he says here, and I will surely bring thee up again. He said, not only are you going to go down there and you're prosperous, but I'm going to bring you out again. So it was in God's plan that they would never stay down there, was it? It was in God's plan that they would go and prosper and then come out of that land and go and dwell into the land of promise. And he said also, and Joseph shall put his hands upon those eyes. And so we find that Joseph is going to lay the hands on Jacob's eyes, and all this is a way of laying on hands as confirmation of what was going on. We know we talked in times past about how sometimes they would put their hands under the thigh of the patriarch. And that's just another way of signifying the covenant that they were making with each other. And so we find, as we continue on to look at this, that Jacob rose up. Jacob rose up, and he's going down now from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, their wives, and the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. It's kind of interesting that Pharaoh's hand is involved in this too, you know. We know Pharaoh had sent wagons and goods back up there so they could make a haste to come down there. So we see God's hand working even through Pharaoh. And one of the things that's kind of interesting historically, they tell us that Pharaoh to the Egyptians was a god himself. He was the god of the sun called Ra. So we find this quite interesting that God here again is using these heathen kings and these heathen nations to carry out his will. And we don't find that unusual, do we? We know when we go back and we take a look at Daniel and all those guys there, that they talk about the God of heaven sets up who he wants and the works of men, even the bases of men. And you know, a base man is one that doesn't have much integrity. He really doesn't have much respectability, really. He's one of those types of characters that'll do most anything to obtain for himself the end means. And so we find that this is going on. Now we'll probably talk more about the Pharaohs when we get into Exodus chapter 1. There are some thoughts about who these particular Pharaohs or kings were that's ruling in Egypt now, but we'll get into that later on. And so we find that they had their wagons full, and they took their cattle in verse 6 and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt, Jacob and all his seed, singular, with him. And so we find that these blessings was going to come to him in this land of Egypt, in this foreign land, a land that you wouldn't have thought would have been too friendly, as we're going to find, to to the Israelites because of one bare fact. The Israelites were shepherds. They had a lot of sheep, didn't they? Egyptians didn't like that. It's kind of interesting at the way that's going to work out about that. That's one of the things that they're going to be talk about later on in this chapter about when you address Pharaoh, how to address Pharaoh about this. And anyway, and verse 7, his sons' sons with him, his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with them into Egypt. And so we find that his presence now is going to be there in Egypt. The next 10 or 12 verses is going to have to do with genealogy, and I don't think we're going to get into that too much. That's a study within itself. What is of note is the sons of Judah. We know and Onan died, and Phares and Zerah is going to be found in the lineage of Jesus Christ. If you turn over and look, sometimes in Matthew chapter 1, you turn over and look at Luke's account, you'll find that these sons here are mentioned. Matthew mentions both of them in his account. Luke only mentions one of them, Phares, in his account. So through this lineage is going to come Jesus Christ. And one of the things you notice here, these other sons and things in this genealogy is listed, and maybe we like to listen to it. These are some players too in all this, because Jacob, or Israel, and Judah, when they go in to take the promised land, they can't do this by themselves. So you can say this cast of characters here, other than Judah and Jacob, are the supporting group of people. It's kind of like maybe making a movie in our day and time. You know, you'll have about 5 or 6 principal players in the movie, what they call the stars, right? But if you look at the credits of the supporting cast and workers, it can be hundreds. And so it's the same thing. And these people were going to be significant in that these families were going to help take the land of Canaan many centuries later. So maybe we can kind of look at it like that this is the supporting cast of people that are significant to make this work. And so we find in verse 26, all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his house, besides Jacob's son's wife, and all the souls were 66. And the sons of Joseph, which was born in Egypt, were 2 souls, and all the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. So that's a total of 7. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. That land of Goshen is real interesting up there in that northeast side of Egypt. Of course, you got the Nile up there, but the beginning of it, but also you got the Mediterranean up there too, so it's a very fertile land. It's a very fertile place. And so they just didn't get any patch of land when they came into Egypt. They got the best. They got the best. And this is where they're going to settle these, and we just use what the KJV uses here, these 70 souls. This is the main core, the main group, the main body, if you will, of these people. They are the ones that the Bible is concerned with, and the ones that are actually even going to be focused on. It's going to get even narrower in the end of the tribe of Judah, which came Jesus Christ. And so we find it was interesting that he sent Judah before them. We have already seen that Judah has started to become kind of the spokesperson for all this. You know, he has had a big change of heart from the time that he had directed or put the idea in that they sell Joseph or kill Joseph and sell him into bondage to a night. So, you know, Judah's become their leader, isn't he? That's a big change of heart. And that's what Joseph was looking for, is a change in the heart and attitude of these brothers. And so we find that Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him, and he fell on his neck and wept on his neck for a good while. you know, we find that this had to be a great joyous reunion, you know. The son that I thought was dead is alive. And you can only imagine the emotion and feeling that was running through Joseph's heart and mind. You know, we find that, you know, like many great men of God, many great workers of God, you know, Israel and Jacob, he had a slow start, didn't he? He had a slow start. He didn't come out the gate wide open running. It took a while for him to take hold of it. And I know we talked about Abraham's call, and it took at least 25 years for the promised son to come. So it didn't happen overnight, did it? You know, it took Isaac 60 years to add another son of Israel, Jacob. And it took 50 or 60 years for Jacob to add 12 sons and a daughter. And it took 430 years for Israel to leave Egypt with 600,000 men of war. Now, if you just do the numbers on that, that tells you already it's a large number of people, because to be a man of war, you had to be 20 years of age or above. So you had a whole bunch of them 19 and less, plus their mom and dad and their grandparents. You can see how easy you can come up with several million people right off the bat, can't you? So it's a big nation. And that's a lot of men of war, trust me. 600,000 men of war, that's a lot. That came out of the family of 70. And all this happened because they listened to God. See how God blessed them? God blessed them in this land of Goshen. I can say it's a very prosperous place. Something else that we're going to get into that we may have started noticing. Did you notice how the Egyptians kind of separated themselves or segregated themselves from the nations around about them? It's just like when they went there to eat with Joseph, because Joseph was not an Egyptian in the truest sense. You know, he ate here and the Egyptians would eat over here. You're going to see the same thing in this, that in God's wisdom and God's plan for them to prosper, they was going to have to stay a separate and distinct nation. They were being separated from, even though they were in the land of Egypt, they were not of the land of Egypt. So what does that remind us of? God separates out his people from the world around about them, doesn't he? We are in the world, but we are not of the world, Jim. That's right. It's the same thing here. So you can see a type and shadow in what's happening here. God did not want them to intermingle with them Egyptians. He'd already said that, you know, many centuries earlier, even when Isaac and those guys were looking for wives. And don't you go up there like into the Philistines and the northern part. Don't you go even to the southern part. You take from the family, you know. And so we see that same thing here. And so being up there where they're at, that's going to kind of put them kind of away from the main body of the Egyptians. And so we're going to see that as this begins to unfold. Any of you brethren got anything you want to comment on that? I know I've been talking 90 to nothing. Brother Con, you look like you had something you wanted to.
I think you got it covered pretty good.
All right, well, we'll keep.
I will say that the Bible said in several places that a shepherd is an abomination to an Egyptian.
And we're going to get to that, yeah.
Yeah, here it ain't quite got
Got
there,
that, yeah.
but you're going to see it.
Yeah, but you can go ahead and talk about it. We're going to get to it. Go ahead if you want to talk about it.
But they don't mind admitting that that's what they are, you know. But
Yeah.
in fact, they're proud of it.
Yeah.
If you want to know the truth.
Right, right,
They're just like they really should be.
right.
But
Yeah.
it's a sad situation coming out of all of it. It looks good right now. But they're going to raise up that other Pharaoh that don't know nothing about Joseph but none of them people. And it's going to be hard on them from then on.
And there's some historical
That's
problems.
going to be in the beginning of Book of
Exodus,
Exodus.
when we're over there. That first chapter covers somewhere around 135 to 150 years of history of that,
But,
okay?
but you can't imagine one thing, I hadn't said that out of that many people that went down there and God had promised them to make a great nation out of them, they multiplied greatly
Right.
out of that many. And then all them others that he had by those, that wasn't his true wife, but he had children by them, they all multiplied
Oh, yeah,
greatly too.
yeah. They were the supporting role. I mean, it was essential for those
Yeah.
people to be involved in this thing. Because like I say, a lot of this, they're not going to be able to do by themselves. We know that God was working with them, but they had to do their part too. And they had to follow the commands of God when they went there and take the land of Canaan, which was going to become their land. And so we find that Israel said unto Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art alive. So we find when Jacob said that was enough at the end of the 45th chapter, that was enough. Now he was prepared to go. He had lived to see what he wanted to see and needed to see, and now there was nothing else. He was ready to go on that. And maybe in our life at some point in time we've had some of the same feelings, that maybe we became very ill and things of that nature, and maybe we had little ones, and maybe our whole goal would have been, I wish I could have lived to see my daughter get married, or something. So maybe we've had to face some of them similar feelings in some cases, in some scenarios. So we find that this does show Jacob's attitude and how it has changed from more or less, woe on me, why is my life in the mess it's in, why are my children being in the problems they are, and all that kind of stuff that he talked about, And Joseph said unto his brethren, unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, my brethren and my father's house, which in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. I want you to think about that. Now Joseph, we know, is acting as an intercessor, right? Pharaoh is the ruler. And, maybe I shouldn't use the term God, but we'll use that as a shadow of the ultimate ruler, which is God. Now, Joseph is going to go up and show Pharaoh my brethren and my father's house. Who are the brethren today that Jesus is the intercessor for before God? We are. What's God's house? His people, the church. It's the same analogy. So we can see that the same thing is going on here that will come into being. Now we know that you have to rightly divide the word, and we see some of the physical here too. That these men are shepherds. For their trade had been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, what is your occupation? That you shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even unto now. Both we and our father, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. There's the first statement of that, isn't it, Brother Con? So, what he's telling them here is when you come before Pharaoh, you tell them that you are a herdsman and that the cattle is what you're about. But yet we're going to find that they're going to identify with the sheep too that's in here. And probably one reason for that is because of this statement here that every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. You find that repeated in Exodus chapter 26 with Moses. And there is a couple of thoughts on that. One of the things is that Egypt was a highly agricultural land. Okay? Sheep, and Jeff, you know more about sheep, I don't know about sheep, okay? I understand that sheep can be very destructive to land. That not only do they eat the grass, but they'll even get the roots. And so they're very destructive. And back in the Old West, there were shepherds out in the Old West, and a lot of times the cattle ranchers and the shepherds would get into a battle over the likes of the land. the cattlemen didn't want the shepherds in this land. Okay, especially in the free roam areas, because the sheep was so destructive. That is more than likely the main body here, but there's also a thought here about who these people were and who these kings were. And that in times past, shepherds from the north had invaded Egypt and had been very destructive in conquering the Egyptian people. So this thing may be twofold. It may be a combination of both, that some of their enemies were shepherds that had been down battling them and had conquered parts of it, and twofold about the destructiveness of it. Okay? But anyway, they didn't look too favorable upon the sheep, okay, being down there. Is there an analogy in there somewhere too? Does the world look favorable upon the sheep of God? Or do they view the church as a threat? Very often the church, when it's very vocal and very outspoken, is viewed as a threat. It's viewed as being destructive, but in reality it's not, is it? But in some sense, how do you have to get into the new? You have to destroy what? The old. So maybe there's something here too in a lesson about all this, that the world looks at shepherds as an abomination. And maybe we could read that like that. For every person of God is an abomination unto the world or Egypt. You know, it's kind of a powerful thought when you look at what is going on here with this. And so we find that it's going to conclude out chapter 46, and we'll move on into chapter 47. And we find that Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. So, you know, they're there, they're in the land of Goshen. We've already talked about that. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. So, you know, that should have struck a note with Pharaoh, shouldn't it? Because it's already said that shepherds were considered an abomination unto Egypt. But notice how God is working in this. They said, moreover, unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land are we come. For thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is so in the land. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants go and dwell in the land of Goshen. You know, two things stand out. One is, notice it says here, to sojourn in the land are we come. Did they have some kind of inkling from what Jacob had been told, or Israel had been told, that they wasn't going to stay there, that they were just sojourners in that land? Was the idea of the land of Canaan being their home implanted in their minds somewhere in all this? For them to have had that thought that we're only sojourners here. We're only passing through. And we know that God had told Jacob that, you're not going to stay here. You're only just passing through. This is a temporary stay. And something else we notice here. They asked Pharaoh if they could stay. Well, we've already seen it painted that, wait a minute, you're going to be given this, so now you're asking. What's with that? Think about it for a minute. Today, God has promised us great and rich blessings, hasn't He? But out of all, what does He want us to do? Make our request known unto Him. He wants us to ask. That's His way of saying, do you know what you need? I know what you need, but do you understand what you need? Do you understand that my blessings is for your needs, not for your wants? So they ask. Just like today when we petition God on behalf of something, right? Whether it be help through a trial, a blessing, or whatever, you know? It's the same thought. They ask if they can stay. And so we find that Pharaoh said unto Joseph, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. And this is Pharaoh speaking. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. So what did Pharaoh say? The best. He didn't say go down here in this dry piece of parchment that nobody wants and make yourself a way if you can. If you make it, fine. If you don't, fine. It's up to you. God gives the best. And so it was here with the children of Israel. God gave them the best. And notice what else he's going to do about these people that are shepherds in nature. And if thou knowest any men of activity, or men that are competent among them, make them rulers over my cattle. We know there was cattle and all that involved in this too, but primarily they were considered to be shepherds because of the massive amount of sheep, but they did cattle too. So Pharaoh said, I'll tell you what, dude, if there are those among you that are qualified herdsmen over cattle, put them over my cattle. Now that's amazing, isn't it? And this is coming from Pharaoh. And so we find that they're being blessed greatly with this. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and said unto Jacob, how old art thou? Now that's kind of interesting because when you look at it, as we said earlier, these pharaohs a lot of times were considered gods themselves. And now Jacob is going to bless what an Egyptian think is already a god. That's kind of strange within itself. And that Pharaoh would accept this blessing. And like we said, that this Pharaoh at this time, from what we know, is considered to be a part of the sun god rule. So that is kind of interesting itself, that the way God is doing this. But he'd already blessed him through Joseph. And now Jacob is giving him his blessing from the best of the land, because Pharaoh has given him the best of the land. Verse 9, and Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. There's another word there that we see used in future reference in the New Testament, like sojourner. What did Jacob call himself? A pilgrim. This almost reads like what Hebrews chapter 10 reads like. A sojourner, a pilgrim, looking for a city whose builder and maker is God. So Jacob is recognizing the fact that he's only a pilgrim, he's only passing through this world. Because notice he says here, 130 years. That's how old he was. I'm just a pilgrim here. I've been wandering for 130 years, and you can still see Jacob's thoughts. And this is really not a cynical statement. Jacob is making a true statement, like we learned when we studied the book of Job, and we go and we talk about the life of David and some of the others in the Bible about their life and times. Notice what he says here. He says, few and evil have the days of the years of my life been. When you stop and think about it, life is full of ups and downs, isn't it? He said, my 130 years here have been full of ups and downs. And that's what we're going to have in life. Isn't it? We're going to have those ups and downs. And so we find, and have not attained unto the days of the years of my father in the days of their pilgrimage. And so we find that Jacob, he said, I'm a pilgrim, I'm just passing through it, but while I'm here, I'm going to have these ups and downs of life until my pilgrimage is fulfilled. And that's the way it is here with us, and ups and downs until our pilgrimage as Christians have been fulfilled. It's kind of like what back in my day as a lot younger person, there was a song on the radio, I hadn't promised you a rose garden. That's kind of what Jacob is saying here. My life hadn't been a rose garden. But God has blessed me through it all. you know, and he began to realize, like Job did about these trials and tribulations, they build character, don't they? They build character within us spiritually. Our reliance upon God and Him demonstrating that. You know, when you look at Job, you get over in the 42nd chapter of Job, the last book. After Job was given all this advice by his friends, Job, somewhere you must have sinned. Job, you had to do something for God to do this, and all these things that went on with Timonez and Eliphaz and all of that. One of the things Job began to realize that is in the first few verses of that chapter 42, there are things that's just too wonderful for me and words that I have uttered that are just too wonderful. And when you look at that, what is Job talking about? Well, what he began to realize is if he knew all, had all, and understood all, why would you need faith? Well, you wouldn't. You know it all. You got all. They know the depths. You know? And that's why in the next few verses below that, God said, now as far as your buddies, Ebenaz and Timonaz and all that, Naz, he said, you better go tell that bunch, they better go repent in sackcloth and ashes, because I'm fixing to net out judgment on them because they were the words that not true. Kind of interested in that, isn't it? So we find the same sentiment, maybe being expressed here. I'm going to have to stop right there because I'm shot over a little bit. We'll get ready for the worship service. Let me ring this bell. Verse 9.